Posted BYU Salem Winona. Have you ever been to a town, village, truck stop, gas station, diner, etc. during a road trip that just didn't feel right, like time seemed to pass differently there, or the people there gave you the creeps? What was your experience there? Coatesville, Pennsylvania. I was with a friend who had come up from Mexico and we were staying a few nights at his grandmother's ranch nearby. Coatesville was the only town around where we could find Mexican ingredients. This is an old steel town that feels post-apocalyptic. Everyone there didn't really seem to be doing anything or going anywhere. It was so creepy. The store we ended up going to had nearly empty shelves and I think the guys were a bit surprised to see us there. All in all, just very strange and eerie. I used to live in southern Africa and we did charity work in a lot of very remote, rural areas, and when I say remote, I mean several hours rough driving on roads that can barely be called roads. Many times we would come across settlements that were not on any map, just a collection of cinder block and mud houses sometimes well off the road. Usually these were what we called working villages, as in there is some work site, maybe a small brickwork, or farm, or something like that nearby, though when I say near, the workers could be walking an hour or so to where they need to be. When we would stumble upon places like this, we would stop, find coordinates and landmarks, make some records and pass it along back to our office. One day, we are working in the area near the borders of South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, and we see some smoke well off the road. Thinking it may be a village, we decide to go off-road to take a look. It was fairly well hidden, behind a small hill, and from the road you would have never known it was there if it were not for the column of smoke on the horizon. We get to it, and sure enough it looks like one of these unmarked working villages, maybe 10 or so huts, but something seemed very off. It took a second and we realized that there was no one around, and yet it seemed as if whoever lived there was there only moments before. We head to where the smoke came from, and it was a large bonfire. When we looked closer, we noticed bones in it, goat and cattle bones. Other than the sound of the fire, there was not a peep from anything else. Once I stepped out of our truck to get a closer look, I had this overwhelming sense that I was being watched from afar, and that I was not welcomed here. The other guys in the truck said they felt the same, and that we needed to go. So we did. A couple of weeks later, when we were driving back, curiosity got the better of me and I decided I wanted to check the site again. This time, however, the village was stripped bare. Anything that could be taken was gone. All that was left was the shells of the huts and a black patch of ash where the fire was. There was one thing that was still there though, the sense of being watched. We didn't stay any longer and never went back. Gary, Indiana. I got off the highway to get gas. Driving through the city was like a post-apocalyptic movie, complete with burned-out cars, crazy guy in underwear walking down the middle of the street with a baseball bat, and all the windows were broken or boarded up. I stopped at a gas station and then guy came out and said, "Get back on the highway, son. It's not safe here." I had enough gas to get to a safer rest stop to refuel. This was around 1994-95. This is my girlfriend's story, but is kinda up the alley of what you are asking for. My partner went to Florida with her family when she was younger and they were driving around trying to find some food until they found a Chinese restaurant and they went in and had some food. There were no other customers, lots of staff, everyone seemed very tense, but the food was great. They left and had a lovely rest of their day. During breakfast the next morning they turned on their telly and the news showed the place they had eaten and they were like, "Wow, look, we went there." Then the story started and it turns out no more than 10 minutes after they left there was a massive shoot-up and they all killed one another. Turns out that the ignorant British tourists just sat in between some kind of Asian turf war. I had the reverse sort of experience at my local supermarket. I live in Australia and we have right-hand drive cars. I'm just finishing my shop when a huge American-looking SUV pulls awkwardly into the car park and it's clearly left-hand drive and maybe 10 years old. I like cars so I'm curious about it, and that's when I notice it's got US plates on it. Now these aren't some novelty/limited edition Aussie plates that look American, these seem to be genuine US plates. They had a state on them, can't remember which one, but it was like Michigan or something. Obviously American. Middle-aged woman gets out, looking like it's a normal day at the shops. So far the story is a bit weird, but nothing too unusual. But as I take my trolley back to the trolley bay, she's there and having obvious problems working out how to unlock one. You have to put a coin in them, and she's clearly having trouble, so I ask if I can help. She's trying to put what I later find out is a quarter in the trolley, saying she's never seen this sort of thing before. I show her the dollar coin I've just gotten back from my trolley. It's gold colored, and she genuinely is weirded out by the color and is incredulous when I tell her it's $1. I feel like I'm an alien showing her a new type of cat or something. I put my dollar in the trolley lock and open it for her because she's clearly lost and I wanted to be helpful. She then sort of gets into "oh I know this" interaction and says "let me give you some money" and opens her purse. It's all American notes, trust me, there's no good old Aussie plastic multicard Monopoly money in this thing. I sort of blurt out, "do you not have Australian money yet?" Thinking that's gonna slow you down in the Aldi there, love. Her reply, "No, why would I?" And she gives me the quarter she was trying to put in the trolley. I tell her it's not necessary, but she thanks me in her wonderful American accent and wanders off into the shop. It was hilarious and weird. If you'd shown me a portal from my shops to Michigan that she'd blundered through, it would have made complete sense. I got the impression she had almost no idea she was in another country. She was acting like I was the weird one, but she also spoke perfectly and was really nice, so it's not like she was in any obvious mental health episode. The fact I have the quarter is the only reason I don't think I've hallucinated the whole thing after eating a dodgy pizza. Friends think her husband had gotten a job in Australia and just got the car and everything etc. shipped, and maybe she's never been overseas before? It was super weird and I love that woman so much. I wish I could find her again to see what she's doing now. I've also been into a country town where literally everyone we saw for the half hour we were there looked like they were from the same family, and everyone stared at us like they knew we were from out of town. But that has a very logical but no less creepy explanation. Smile. I was on a road trip on the South Island of New Zealand and one night at around 9 p.m. decided to stop in a small town to get some rest. Already while driving into the town I noticed that there were Christmas decorations everywhere, like decorated trees and plastic Santas, reindeer etc. Excessive amounts of decorations on the streets and in every window. This wouldn't have been too weird if it hadn't been in the middle of August. But I thought the town was just really dedicated to a specific aesthetic or whatever. I got to the motel and checked in and the old lady at the front desk was short and rude with me, which I thought was weird. I had experienced people in NZ as really nice and quite chatty, compared to where I come from, lol. She also wouldn't give me the Wi-Fi password even though they advertised free Wi-Fi. She quite literally told me to piss off and let her get back to her newspaper. After that I went out and the whole time I was there I never saw any people on the street. I went to a diner near the motel, both also stuffed with Christmas decorations, and had the same experience with the waitress while ordering. She told me they are out of almost everything and the only I was able to get was a cheese sandwich. There were other people in the restaurant who were all eating what I suppose were meals from the menu. They didn't have to order a plain cheese sandwich. While waiting for my food I noticed that no one in the whole diner was talking even though there were families and other groups of people. Even the kids ate in silence. Or not really silence, as there was Christmas music blaring. After I was done eating I just paid and left. I was also the only one leaving. No one in that diner, the whole time I was there, got up to leave or go to the bathroom or do anything really. They all just sat there. When I left I felt like they were all starting holes in my back. The whole time I was in that town I got a feeling that everyone wanted me to leave and like they were somehow angry with me. This was 4 years ago and TBH I don't remember anything after leaving the diner. I don't remember going back to the motel or going to sleep and just barely remember being on the road early the next morning. I told some of my NZ friends this story. I thought it was some kind of weird theme town, but none of them ever heard of it and I can't for the life of me remember the name of that town or how I found it. My girlfriend and I went to an Airbnb in a town called Tiger, Georgia to see a bunch of her old college friends. There was one other couple who got there about the same time we did. By day the cabin looks pleasant enough, 3 stories of rustic comfort with a hot tub overlooking the forest and sunrise. We didn't get there by day. We got there as the sun was sinking low. Rooms seemed to shrink and tighten. The stairwells were only as wide as a single body. And at the bottom of the basement stairs, a rug hid a padlock trapdoor. It felt like the start of a horror movie. We're trying to ignore the weird vibes and decide to go to dinner. We spent nearly an hour driving around searching for a place to eat. Steakhouses closed by 7 p.m., an Italian joint which was now someone's house. A Mexican eatery now abandoned and overgrown with vines. Finally we find something. It's suitably called the last dive bar on earth, and it's sitting on the edge of a retention pond. The parking lot is full of pickup trucks all festooned with old political bumper stickers from the late 90s and early 2000s. We head in. It's like we've entered another decade. But the beer is good, they have pizza, and the prices aren't bad. We eat in a hurry and get out of there. As we get back to the cabin, the other couples are there and talking about how they had such a nice time in town. It was only by daylight at the end of the weekend that as we descended the mountain we found a ton of local shops and restaurants that I swear to fucking God were not there the first night. On the first night, The electrical outlets in the house fried my phone, leaving me with no way to contact the outside world. The weekend ended up being nice, but the entire time we all felt like we had fallen through a crack into someone else. Yep, stopped in a no-name town in Texas for gas. Bunch of guys wearing nothing but denim hanging out in front of the gas station. Denim, cowboy hats, cowboy boots. It wasn't just a lot of people, everyone was wearing that. Their drawls were so thick I could barely understand what they were saying to one another, a lot of hooting and hollering. About 50 yards away, there was a guy sitting under a tree. He was wearing a black and white striped jumpsuit, and was chained to the tree by a shackle on his leg. Didn't see any law enforcement around, maybe they dropped him off? A girl with huge tits, 1.5 arms, and an eye patch complimented my car and smiled at me when I was pumping gas. I saw a cow trotting down the side of the road, no one seemed to be chasing it. The fact it was twilight seemed to make everything surreal. I unearthed myself from that place as quickly as I could. Back in 2011, my ex and I took a trip to go visit my dad, who at the time lived in the tiny town of Middleton, Tennessee. I lived at the other end of the state, so it was about an 8-hour trip. Decided to go at night so I wouldn't have to deal with anyone on the interstate other than truckers and the occasional car. The trip was fine until we got off the interstate and went through some small town maybe an hour or so before Middleton. My memory's hazy on exactly where it was, but at that point it was about 4 in the morning. We were rolling through the town, and it was foggy and dark, minimal streetlights, all the houses were completely dark and still. It was a little creepy looking but nothing really out of the ordinary until we got a little further down the road and there were fucking newspapers everywhere. Scattered all on the road, in the empty fields and the yards of the houses we passed, just loose pages of newspaper everywhere we looked. I'm sure there was a reasonable explanation, but both of us just suddenly felt like something was off, and it was creepy as hell. One of us cracked a joke about suddenly landing in a horror movie without realizing, and I sped up the car a little bit, but for about 10 minutes it was just us and the newspapers and the fog and the complete stillness in this dark town, and we both sighed audibly in relief once it fell behind us. We talked about it for years after that trip. On a second trip to the same town years later, once again in the early hours, we stopped at a gas station I always stopped at, and though I'd always felt safe at it before, that time I felt a little uneasy, but didn't know why. We went in the store and this group of guys and a girl came in yelling at this other guy. Cashier made them leave and they tore out. Came back not 5 minutes later and beat the guy they'd been harassing with some kind of bat. It was a mess, cops were called, ambulance. I'll never forget how dazed that poor guy looked with blood coming all down the side of his head. So I guess that time I had a legit reason for things feeling off. TL, Doctor, I should stop making the trip from East TN to West TN. On my first trip to Europe, we started in Rome, and drove down to Sicily, and on the way back north, we decided to stay the night in a small town instead of a major city. We ended up at a town called Lauria right on dark, and hadn't booked any accommodation yet. We didn't know where we were going to end up, wanted to get as far as we could. As we drive around the town looking for a hotel, every local is stopping in their tracks and watching us like we are very out of place. We find and pull up at the only hotel we could find, a multi-level building with an empty car park, no guests or staff around. Went in and booked a room, and the guy who served us took our bags, put us in the elevator and sent us on the way to our room. We get up 3 floors and here he is waiting for us with our bags, not puffed out having outran an elevator while carrying 3 bags. It's the classic horror movie hallways, seemingly too long for the building and only half the lights are working. It's dead quiet inside, so we put our stuff in the room and get out to see if the town is really that bad. We head out for dinner, again every stopping and staring at us as we walk down the streets. The next morning, we wake up early to GTFO and find all the doors are locked and cannot be opened from the inside without a key, no staff anywhere, so we left the key on the desk and had to break out of the hotel window to get out. 10/10 was spooked. Rest of the trip was amazing, through Switzerland and France, quick trip around England and Scotland then home.